So hi everyone, welcome to today's session. We know that the pass rate for the recent exam was only 34%. And what that means is that out of 10 students, generally, globally, only about 3 or 4 are going to get through, and the rest of them will have to resit. It is very frustrating to actually fail the exam because it looks like you've done the work, you've done the studying, and you have done the past year questions. But where did you go wrong? That's the important thing, because if you are resitting the exam, if you don't know what the root cause is, chances are you're going to be studying the same way as what you did previously. So it's very important for you to realize that there were some mistakes that were made, and these were big mistakes. How do we know it's big mistakes? Because if you're resitting the exam, it simply means that your marks for the previous exam were less than 15. So if the whole exam was 100 marker, and let's say a student only got 45, that means there's 55 marks that the student was not aware of, that the 55 marks could not be obtained, that the student only had knowledge for 45 marks, let's say. So today's session is really very important. If you are resitting the exam, and today's session is also important for those people who are going in for the exam for the first time, to make sure that you do not make these mistakes. And some of these mistakes are, well, students are just not aware that they are making those mistakes. So that's the main aim of today's session, so that when you're going in for the exam, you're not preparing the same way as you did for the September exam. Because if you prepare the same way as you did for the September exam, chances are you're going to get the same results as the September exam. And I have seen students who, when they join my program, they tell me that they've sat for this exam 6 times, 9 times. And there was one girl who sat for it 13 times. Can you imagine the amount of money that was wasted in exam fees? And the only person who got richer was the ACCA. 13 times. And when she sat for the exam, she got through when she joined the course. And she only joined the crash course. So that's really very good. She was willing to make changes to her study habits and then move on. So today's session is not about that you need to spend 6 hours every day or anything like that. It's not. So let's just go through it. Okay, so today's session is about the strategy for passing the December 23 exam, or if you're sitting for March, it will be the March 2024 exam. You must have a strong strategy. The strategy is a type of a roadmap. If you don't have a roadmap, then chances are, if your destination is quite far away and if you're not familiar with it, you might get lost along the way. And especially if you're resitting, the danger here is that you're already used to a particular roadmap, the old roadmap, the one that gave you 45 marks. And therefore, it's important now, if you're resitting the exam, to make sure that you've got a clear roadmap. And I want to share that roadmap with you to make sure that you don't make the same mistake. So there will need to be some changes made. You cannot use your old method. If you use your old method, you're going to end up getting the same marks as before. So there has to be some change. So what are the changes? So a roadmap is really very important because it'll help you to get to your destination. Just like when you're driving a car, we've got GPS in our cars and we just key in the destination, and you make sure that you follow the GPS. Otherwise, you're going to end up in some place that is wrong. You know, in Malaysia, we've got a mixed crowd here. Some of you are from Malaysia, some of you are from overseas. And in Malaysia, we have got a cobweb of highways. Okay, it's one going over another, and when you find that the GPS that you put on in the car, the Waze, the GPS, sometimes the roads are so closely connected that if you're not familiar with that road, even with the GPS, you could end up in the wrong place, and then it'll take you another 1 hour to get back to your destination. So it's very important to follow the GPS, but at the same time, you also need to be aware of where you are going. even if you're driving a car, you cannot rely on your GPS 100%. Yes, the GPS is there. You need to trust it, but you also need to know, you need to have a general idea of how to get from point A to point B. Otherwise, if the roads are very closely connected together, you might just take the wrong turning because it looks like the GPS is pointing you that way. So that is from driving. So you must have a strategy. So with a strategy, what will happen is that at the end of week 1, you will know exactly where you are. At the end of week 2, you will in November, you will know exactly where you are. At the end of week 3, November, you will know exactly where you are. So the roadmap is also sort of a time map so that you can see how you are progressing. Because if you don't have a roadmap, then you won't know whether you are at 50% of the journey or not, or whether there's 75% of the journey to go on to. You will not be familiar. Then before you know it, the exam is there, and then you are only at 25% of the journey, whereas the exam has already started. Okay, so having a roadmap is not only telling you what you need to do, but it also gives you an idea of whether you are on track or whether you are falling behind. Because if you're falling behind on your progress, you're not going to be able to make it to the pass mark on the day of the exam. So you've got to remember that those people who are resitting the exam, if you are, that you lost 50% of the marks. And it's important now to find out why you lost that 50% of the marks. So this is also applicable for those people who are sitting for the exam for the first time, because if you're aware that these are the mistakes that other students are making, then you need to make sure you do not make the same mistake. All right. Now, sometimes students think that it is the tutor who needs the roadmap, that the tutor is the one who needs to know the beginning of the journey and the end of the journey, that students sometimes feel that they don't need to know the roadmap, that the tutor will help us as we go along. Well, while that is true, you also need to know where you are going. You need to take responsibility for your own journey. So it's not just the tutor that needs a map. The student also needs a map, so that you can look at that map and see, well, the tutor is 50% through the syllabus, but I am only on 10% of the syllabus. So you need to also monitor your progress, okay? So the tutor can give you a map, but your responsibility is to follow that map. And if you don't follow that map and you create your own map, I'm not sure where that's going to lead to. You've got to remember that when your tutor gives you a map, it is based on experience. The tutor has usually been teaching for a very long time. I've been teaching for about 30 years now. And I have fine-tuned the roadmap so many times. So I know exactly what students need to do in order to pass the exam. I'm also very familiar with the common mistakes made by students, because I also mark their progress tests and their mock exams, and on the boot camp, they've also got assignments. So I know exactly where the common mistakes are. All right. So the best thing is learn from a tutor and trust their advice. Once you get a tutor, follow them. Trust their advice. Don't modify the roadmap halfway down the way. All right. So if your tutor has given you a roadmap, just follow it. If you follow it, you should be able to get through. However, there are some students who have got very good tutors, but they still fail the exam. So what went wrong? Well, usually it is because they have been following the roadmap through, but they have not followed it 100%. Of course, in the middle, there could also be personal issues, family issues. There could also be health issues. That's a possibility. But putting that aside, because that is exceptional, isn't it? There's nothing much that we can do about it. But for yourself, it will be very important for you to follow it. So just now I was talking about some students have got very good tutors, but how come they still fail? The reason is because they don't follow the advice fully. That's the main reason. So there are two groups today. There are students who are sitting for AAA for the first time, which is really very good. And your SPR knowledge is probably fairly fresh because you've just sat for the exam. However, fairly fresh does not mean fresh. And this really depends on how many marks you got for your SBR. If let's say for your SBR, you only got 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, you are still in a high risk category. Why? I know you passed your SBR, but your IFRS knowledge is kind of weak, very wobbly. And for your AAA exam, you need to have strong IFRS background. Why? Because we are auditing accounts. We're auditing the financial statements. So if you don't know the recognition criteria for assets held for sale, how on earth are you going to be able to carry out the audit procedures for that? Like, for example, assets held for sale. What would be the criteria? Can you type into the chat? There must be an intent to sell. So management committed to a plan to sell, and that the sale is going to be probable within 12 months. It is not so much that there's board approval to sell. It is more of management committed to a plan to sell. But of course, the evidence can be found in the board minutes, and the evidence can also be found by the fact that you have already appointed a real estate agent. And yeah, available for immediate sale. Very good. And the sale is going to be probable. Actively looking for a buyer. Very good. Okay. So let's just summarize that. What is the recognition criteria? Management committed to a plan to sell, actively looking for a buyer, asset available for immediate sale, sale is probable, and sale is going to take place within 12 months. So if you know this, then when it comes to the audit procedures, you will know exactly how to audit them one by one. Let me give you another example. So let's say it is audit procedures for share options. Based on IFRS 2, you need to make sure that you know the number of staff receiving the options that have been received, the fair value at the grant date, and the time to vesting. So with my students, I usually use a little acronym. Okay, it is S times O times F times T. So we've got soft. So when we carry out the audit procedures, we're going to audit, first of all, the number of staff. Now, it's very important for us to know the number of staff that we're going to get, that are getting the share options. But it's also very important that we know that the number of staff who are going to remain on the date of the vesting. So this is where your turnover rate comes in. So we're going to audit that. Then the number of options given. Then after that, the fair value at the grant date. And when you audit the fair value at the grant date, you need to make sure that whoever who is doing the calculation is using some kind of a options pricing model. And then time to vesting is that it is going to be over 3 years, or if the plan was introduced halfway through the year, it will be divided by 3, but at the same time, it will be multiplied by 6/12. So all of this would be very, very helpful for you when it comes to the audit procedure part, or even when it comes to your audit risk kind of questions. So having your IFRS knowledge is very, very important. Now, for those of you who are resetting, the danger here is that if you have reset twice or 3 times, that means your SBR knowledge is going to be like 2 or 3 sittings ago. And therefore, with every single semester, your accounting knowledge could be impaired. Yeah, you do recognize development costs. Yeah, you do recognize share options. Yeah, you do recognize assets held for sale. Yeah, you do. But the specific knowledge of it might actually be going down. You've got to remember that knowledge is a little bit like your intangible. Intangibles are going to be tested for impairment all the time. Yeah, so your IFRS knowledge. I know you passed your SBR, but when did you pass your SBR? Was passed your SBR, let's say 3 years ago, yeah, at 52 marks. So can you imagine how much of that knowledge is going to be really intact? So if you're resitting for the exam, your SBR knowledge will need refreshing. So all my courses, I provide them with the IFRS summary notes, because you need to refresh your knowledge. So that is very important. So the IFRS summary notes that I provide for my students is designed for AAA exam, because in AAA, it's important to know the recognition criteria, the measurement rules. This SBR knowledge is actually assumed knowledge, because if you've already passed the exam, we assume that your knowledge is intact. So if your tutor does not provide you with this information, then you need to go back to your SBR notes or something like that. So the danger here is with the students, it's high risk. Okay, so now you not only have to learn your AAA, but you have to upgrade your IFRS knowledge that might have seen some impairment. So what will happen is that if your IFRS knowledge is a little impaired, you will find that when you're doing the exam, your answers are going to be very shallow. There's not going to be much substance there because you've forgotten all your standards. The responsibility to make sure that your IFRS knowledge is intact falls on you, I'm afraid. Yeah, your tutor may support you, but it is your responsibility. So how would you know whether your IFRS knowledge is impaired or not? When you do the exam questions, when you mark your answer, you can see whether your answer is shallow or not. So the other thing, very, very important thing for those people who are resitting is that you need to move all your old notes and your questions or whatever to the storeroom. Move it away from you. If possible, send it 20 miles away. Don't look at anything that is old. Because the minute you're looking at something old, your mind will automatically tell you, I know this. But actually, you don't know. Actually, when you say you know this, you're just saying, I recognize it. I've seen it before because it's in my notes. So if you still are using the old notes, your old textbook where you have underlined or highlighted or something, everything old, just chuck it away. It's to do with that failing of that exam. So the best thing for you to do is bundle it all up, put it in a box, wrap it up, bubble wrap it or cling wrap it or something, and put it in the attic, put it in the storeroom. Don't look at it. Don't, even if it's the revision kit, anything to do with your past failure, put it away. My brother-in-law is a CMA grad. He's a CEO of a company, and we were talking about this, and he said the best thing for the student to do if they're resitting is to burn everything. So I'm not asking you to burn it. I'm just saying move it to the attic, move it to the storeroom, pack it up so that you don't see it, because that is to do with your past life that did not work out so well. Start again, start afresh. That will be important. So the AAA exam is likened to you taking a journey in a ship in rough waters. So the AAA exam is a challenging exam. On that Monday, when you open up the exam paper, you will feel like it's a storm. So it is very important that you know how to handle that ship to make sure that you arrive at the destination in one piece. Make sure that it's not a shipwreck. So you need to be aware of how to work through the storm. In order to survive a storm, you need to have 4 things. So today, we're going to cover exam strategy and common mistakes, but let's have a look at exam strategy first, okay? Your question 1 is like an anchor question. So those students in my program, we train them really hard on question 1, especially the boot campers. They do 8 assignments, and all the 8 assignments are question 1, which I have designed by myself, and therefore they cannot find the answer anywhere. It's like looking at a new exam question. And by the time they come to assignment number 4, they are already hitting 70 to 80% of the marks for question 1. What that means is that if your question 1, the anchor is really strong and not, shaky, you will weather through the storm. So the first thing that you need is a strong anchor. Your anchor will be question 1. Why is it question 1? Because it's the most predictable question. We'll come back to that. The second element that you need is strong sails. Your sails cannot be torn. If your sails are torn here in the storm, you would be at the mercy of the raging ocean. We don't want that. We want to have strong sails so that we can go in the direction that we want to. When you talk about strong sails, we're thinking about question 2 because they're also predictable. So you need a strong anchor, which is your question 1. Always start with question 1. I know some tutors say start with whichever question that you feel comfortable with, but it's not like that. Why? Because I don't allow my students to choose which question, because question 1 is the most predictable. If it is the most predictable, you should begin with that. Not only that, but your question 1, 40 marks are your technical content marks and 10 marks are for your professional skill marks. And in your question 1, what kind of questions are you going to get? You are going to get significant business risk. Then after that, you're going to get significant audit risk, or it is ROMM. Then after that, you have got this thing called principal audit procedures. And then after that, you're probably going to have some ethics stuff, possibly. So it's very, very predictable. And you know what? You know, when it comes to this significant audit risk or ROMM, if you can master that and get full marks for that, it will be so easy for you to get the full 10 professional skills marks just from doing that audit risk. But of course, you need to know how to get the 10 professional skills mark. So I know in every question we've got professional skills mark, but for question 1, they are the easiest to get 10/10. So in the boot camp, when they do the assignment, most students get 10/10. In the worst case scenario, they get 9/10. So you need to make sure that you master your question 1. You have to aim to get at least 30 marks from your question 1. 10 marks is from your professional skill. That will give you 40 marks. So question 1 has got the most predictable kind of questions. If they're the most predictable, don't you think the right thing for you to do would be to master them? It makes sense, right? So go with question 1. They're the easiest. Now, what is significant business risk or significant audit risk? We'll come to that in a minute, okay? Second one is your question 2. Your question 2 is a finalization and reporting question. So what do you have in a finalization reporting question? There are 7 kinds of questions that can actually come out. So what are the 7 kinds? First of all, you've got going concern. That will come out as a full question. Then we have got something called matters and evidence. Then we have got something called implications for the auditor's report. Then we've got critical appraisal of the audit report. Then after that, we have got sufficiency of evidence kind of a question. Now, sufficiency of evidence kind of a question can also come together with another kind of a question that is called procedures to completion. So each one has got a different exam technique, but they are sort of in the same camp, same idea. Sufficiency of evidence simply means that you've not got enough evidence, but you need to know how to find out which evidence is missing. Procedures to completion, you need to know what you have done and what else you need to do to sign off the audit report. Then you have got matters to discuss with management. And after that, you've got matters that you are going to communicate with those charged with governance. These are the 7 topics that you have inside here. So with my boot campers or in my program, even with a self-study, you know it's 25 marks, right? I'm telling them at least get 15 of your technical marks and another maybe 3 out of the 5 professional skills mark, because for section B question, it's a little bit more difficult getting the professional skills mark. So even on the boot camp, I find that students generally, they can get 3. So if you can, on the technical content side, get 15, you can get plus your 3, you've got 18/25. And remember, earlier you have already got 40 marks. And if you can get 18, you're well on your way to passing. So a strategy is very important. You need to know what is your anchor question and which question will give you the sail to allow you to progress faster. The question with the sail is your question 2. You need to make sure that you're strong in your question 2. Then when it comes to question 3, this is a helm. You know, every ship has got a helm. yeah, the steering wheel kind of a thing, you need to make sure that it is as big as possible. Because if your ship has got a very small steering wheel, you're not going to get very far. The steering wheel have to be very, very broad and very wide. So this one, what kind of questions come here? You have got your quality questions, and then you have your 4 non-audit assignments. What are they? You have got KPI, you've got PFI, prospective financial information, you've got due diligence, and forensics. So in the September exam, what came out? This two came out. One group of students had due diligence, another group of students had forensics. When it's part of your strategy, you need to know which kind of questions you need to go for first. And then you need to make sure that you're really strong. And very important, you need to have a target. And your target is question 1 has to be 40. How do you get 40? 10 out of 10 professional skills mark and 30 out of 40 of the technical content mark. You must not only pay attention to the type of question, you also need to know where your target is. You need to know where you're moving. So every time you do a question, see whether you're on target or not. And if you're not on target, then I suggest you try that question out again. Do you think you can do that? Now, students at this point will turn around and say, how many times do I ever try the question? Well, for question 1, you know you're supposed to get 40 marks, right? So you tried the first time. Do you get 40? No, maybe you get 20 out of 50. So obviously you need to try that question again. So give it 3 or 4 days and try that same question again. Now, if after 3 or 4 days, remember your initial marks was 20. If after 3 or 4 days, you can only get 22, that means your question practice is really lousy. Why? Because the first time you did the question, you didn't even bother to find out what were your mistakes, why you made the mistakes. You didn't analyze your mistake. Because if you really did that, and if you took the time and trouble to learn from your mistakes, the second time you do the exact same question, don't you think it should be nearer full marks because you've already seen the question before? Seen the answer before as well. Yeah? So it's really very important that the first time you do the question, it is bad, it's excusable. Second time you do the question, it's the same question, it's still bad, unforgivable. So the mistake students make is that they tend to forgive themselves. Ah, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. And by the time you reach the exam, it's okay results in a failure. So whenever you do a question, it is not only important that you compare it with the suggested answer, but you also identify, why did I make that mistake? Was it because I did not know this? Was it because I was careless? What was the reason? Then go and fix that mistake. Because if you don't fix that mistake, it's going to come back and bite you the next time around. So those of you who are resitting, it is super important that you take exam question practice really seriously. Question 1 is your anchor question. Without your anchor question, when the storm comes, you're going to be tossed left, right, and center. Not good. You need to be secure. Then you need to master your question 2. Then you need to master your question 3. Sheila is asking a question, procedures to completion. What is that? So procedures to completion is where you are at the end of the audit, and the question usually says that next week the audit report is going to be signed, but there are still some issues that have not yet been settled. So what could be the procedures to completion? Procedures to completion means what are the things that you need to do in order to be able to sign off the audit report? So if there are issues relating to maybe you don't have the evidence, you need to look at the scenario to find out why you don't have the evidence. And if management is the one that's holding back on the evidence, one of the things that we can do under procedures to completion is to communicate with those charged with governance and ask them to help us to get that evidence for us. So it really depends on the scenario, procedures to completion. But I hope you're taking down this note. The first thing as part of your exam strategy is that you need to know which is your anchor question, which is the question that will give you your sales, and which one will give you your helm. Okay, this is your quality review questions. Then you have got the 4 non-audit assignments. Now, the last picture here is the rudder. The rudder is that little small thing at the back of the ship. So you will find that many students do not pay attention to the rudder. So what is the rudder? Since we're talking about ships, let's just focus on the different parts of the ships. We've got the anchor, we've got the sails, we've got the helm, the steering wheel, and we've got the rudder. The rudder represents knowledge. So as far as you're concerned, we've got 35 IFRSs that you need to be familiar with. And if you've already passed your SBR, you should be okay with that. The only thing is, I'm concerned when you passed your SBR. When you pass your SBR, if it's a long time ago, then your SBR knowledge might be impaired. I've got a question in the chat. Can we learn IFRSs and ISAs from the answers, or is it not enough? Well, in each exam, the examiners will be throwing in something new. So if you're only going to be working with past year questions, then you will be blindsided. You need to have proper knowledge. You need to join a course. You need to have a tutor to teach you. Yeah. So 35 IFRSs are from your SBR. Then we've got 34 auditing standards. Some are more important than the others for the AAA exam, but you need to know all of them. Why? Because of this question here, the quality review question. If your ISAs are not strong, you will not be able to answer the quality review question, because based on the scenario, you won't even know what is going wrong. You will only know what is going wrong if you know what is right. On top of that, you will have your 2 ISQMs, ISQM 1, ISQM 2, super important for the AAA exam. And for your ISAs, please take note that ISA 600 is revised. It was not examined in September. It could be examined in December. ISA 600 revised is on group accounts. Yes, it's a new standard. And then you have got the 36 requirements of the ACCA Code. So one of the mistakes that students make is that when they're studying for the exam, they don't number the standards. They don't put a number. I put down a number, because you need to know which standard you are strong in and which standard you're weak in. You need to know that there are 36 requirements of the ACCA Code. You need to put a number and say, I know this, I know this, I know this. Not generally the ACCA Code. You need to know very, very specific. Why do you need to know specifics? The reason is because when it comes out in your exam, supposing that you have got an ethics question, it's always about ethical issues, right? Issues is a problem. We always have got to start off with the threat. So the threat comes from the ACCA Code, but you're not going to get any marks for the threat unless you explain how that threat affects the behavior of the audit team. So you're going to say that maybe a self-review threat in that the audit team is unlikely to be critical of the information because it was the audit team that derived that information in the first place. It was the audit team that calculated deferred tax in the first place. So you have to explain the impact of that threat on the behavior of the auditor. If you simply put down self-review threat or self-interest threat, you're not going to get any marks at all. Then you are going to put down the severity of the threat and what the ACCA Code says about it. So how are you going to put that down if you're not familiar with the ACCA Code? You need to know the 36 requirements. Now, all the 36 requirements are inside your manuals or something like that, but you need to take a pencil and say, this is number 1. Yeah, on the area of fees, you have got lowballing, for example, number 1. Number 2, undue dependence. Number 3, on the area of fees could be that they owe you the money for the fees for a very long period of time, for example. So you need to put down the number so that when you're studying that threat, you are straight away studying it together with what the ACCA Code says about it. So please take note, the severity of the threat and what the ACCA Code says about it, they are linked together, because if the threat is not severe, then usually ACCA Code says it's okay. So you need to answer them. So when you write your answer in the exam, severity of the threat and the ACCA Code is 1 mark. You need to put down what the ACCA Code says. Then after that, you're going to put down the safeguard or the action. Safeguard is something where you can reduce the threat. Action is where the threat is too high, and that's it. The action here is to decline the client's request and explain to the client the reason for this decision. But remember, when you put down decline this service or decline client's request and explain the reason, you will only get marks for that if you've already explained the reason here. So if you did not explain the reason here, the rule here, and you simply put down here, decline and explain the reason to the client, you're not going to get any marks because the answer is empty. Yeah, so I find that sometimes students get into this habit where they're quite familiar with this one. They know this line by heart. Decline it and explain the reason. But you didn't even put the reason down here. So how do I know that you know the reason? Yeah. So the exam technique that I use for ethics question is something called TSAFA. Why? Because that's based on the marking scheme. 1 mark for the threat, 1 mark for what the ACCA Code says, and 1 mark for the safeguard or the action. Now, in your exam question, so let's say it's for the ethics part, maybe it's 6 marks or maybe 8 marks. So maybe the examiner expects you to identify 3 issues and deal with 3 issues. So when you put down the threat here, you not only get the marks here, you also get a professional skill mark. And when you put this down, this is part of professional judgment, application of professional judgment to the scenario. So you're going to get another professional skill mark. And here, you also have got another professional skill mark for putting down the right response. So the exam technique that I have for getting the technical content marks will automatically help you get the professional skills mark as well. The point I'm trying to make here is that the rudder is that you need to have knowledge. So you find that students sometimes, they just go straight to the exam question and they miss out that knowledge, then their marks are not going to improve. Now, if you already passed the exam, that's okay. But if you're resitting the exam, maybe it is your knowledge that is faulty. You need to double check that. Maybe take a couple of days, and especially if you're resitting, meaning that you've already studied it before, so go through the ISIS and the ISQMs and the 36 requirements of the ACCA Code and pay attention. I'm not asking you to read it. I'm asking you to take out a blank piece of paper and write down, okay, so let's say it's on written representation, for example. What are the rules on written representation? I know everybody recognizes the word written representation, but do you really know what is inside written representations? Do you know when you can apply, when you cannot apply? In order for you to face the storm, first of all, your strategy is you need to know which is your anchor question, which is your sails, which is your helm or your steering wheel, and which is your rudder. That is just basic. If you're going to prepare for the exam without realizing the different components of your strategy, you're going to have problem. The reason why I have created this strategy for my students is because at the end of the day, everything is about marks. You have to cross 50% marks. So with my students on the boot camp, for example, and even on the self-study program, I tell them that they have to hit now itself, they have to hit 80% of the marks. So when they're doing their question 1, they have to get 40 out of 50. And on the boot camp, by the time they reach assignment number 4, remember there are 8 assignments, right? By the time they reach assignment number 4, majority of them have already crossed onto the high 70s. So you might not be on the boot camp, but you know what? You can do it by yourself. How do you do it? You practice the question, you look at the answer, write down on the side what were your mistakes, and then have a cup of coffee, stop and think about why you made that mistake. I mean, if you say that you've been studying, how come you made that mistake? Is it because you did not study it yet? Maybe it's something that's new to you. It's a possibility. Then learn it now. Or if you've already learned it, how come you're making that mistake again? Doesn't make sense. That means you are learning or you're preparing by habit rather than doing it intelligently. So you find that in the exam, you cannot make much progress because you are not doing the thinking when you were studying. What do you mean by thinking? So you do a question, you get the marks, you compare it with the suggested answer and say, suggested answer has got that. I don't have that. How come? Why did I miss it? Is that point really important? How does it link to the marking scheme? Then the next time you do the next question one, if you have really analyzed your mistakes properly, the first time you did one of the question one, next time you do the next question one, then if you really learned your lesson, the next time you do it, your marks are going to be significantly higher. Not higher by 2 marks, significantly higher. So that shows that you are learning from your mistakes. All right. So the reason why students fail is because it cannot be that they don't have all of this. It cannot be, but maybe 2 out of the 4 of this is missing. Or maybe your anchor is not so strong. Maybe your sail is not so strong. Maybe your helm is too small, and maybe your rudder is not really working. Then your marks will be 45 to 49. So it is really important that if you want to pass the exam, this one here has got to be super strong. Really, really super strong. Why? Because this one is where the questions are the most predictable. Question 2, it is 1 out of 7. I don't know who's going to get 1 out of 7 because for question 2, some sittings, there are 3 different question 2. Some, like September, there were only 2 different question 2. So we don't know who's going to get which question. Yeah, but for question 1, everybody's going to get audit risk. Everybody's going to get principal audit procedures. Everybody's going to get ethics. So why don't you master that now itself? Yeah. So that would be important. So what is the first thing here? The first thing here in your exam strategy is you need to know right up front from day 1, which is my anchor question, which is my sails, which one is my helm, and then work on your rudder as well. That's the first thing that you need to do. Now, the common mistakes with those people who are resitting the exam, this one, they usually turn around and say, I already know it. And therefore, they don't go back and consolidate it, not realizing that their knowledge, their prior knowledge has impaired. All right, I've got a question that says, why didn't you place NOCLA and fraud? Yeah, I mean, I've not placed everything inside here. So if you get NOCLA and fraud, NOCLA could come in your question 1 or one part of your question 1, maybe the last part of the question 1. And NOCLA is part of ethics. Actually, when you say ethics here, ethics actually includes your ACCA code. It includes NOCLA, money laundering, fraud. They all sort of come under ethics. Why does it come under ethics? It's not in the ACCA code per se, but the reason why it comes under ethics is because when the client has done something wrong, we have to maintain integrity. We cannot cover up for the client. So by virtue of that, those topics actually come under ethics as well. So we're not going into too much detail at the moment, okay, because we've only got a couple of hours here. Fraud could come in here, especially on this area. We're talking about fraud during an audit. I'm not talking about forensics, okay? Forensics is something else. Forensics is an investigation. What is the difference between fraud here and an investigation here? A fraud here, the idea is to do with the assertions. It's to do with true and fair. Whereas forensics has got nothing to do with true and fair. That's the major difference here. So there are 3 stages of exam preparation strategy. There's the learning phase, there's the exam question practice phase, and then you have got the testing phase. So let's just go through them one by one.